Ethan froze as the knock at his apartment door echoed through the silence. He hadn't seen her in years, not since the day he walked away from the life he thought he knew. Slowly, he opened the door, and there she was. Maya stood before him, her eyes filled with regret, her voice trembling. "Ethan," she whispered, "I've been searching for you. Please, just hear me out." His chest tightened, memories of betrayal flooding back. Could he even face the woman who had shattered everything? Ethan Harper was a man of quiet strength. His calm demeanor had grounded his family. He had the gentle confidence of someone who had built a life with intention. His mornings reflected this, the peace of his routine, the joy of family anchoring his day. The kitchen was his favorite place. It was where he could enjoy the laughter of his son and the warm companionship of his wife, Elena. She was the heart of their home, always bustling with energy, her laughter filling every corner. That morning, she moved gracefully between the stove and the sink, her humming adding a soothing undertone to the day's rhythm. Their son, Lucas, was the light of their lives. A spirited child, his boundless curiosity and infectious laughter held the family together. His chatter filled the house, making every moment brighter. Together, they painted the picture of a perfect family. But as Ethan unfolded the document in his hands, a fissure began to form, a crack that would threaten to shatter everything he held dear. Ethan's fingers trembled as he unfolded the document, his curiosity piqued by its unfamiliarity. The bold letters at the top caught his eye, DNA test results. The heading alone sent a ripple of unease through him. He brushed it off, assuming it was a mix-up that didn't concern him. But something made him pause. The numbers and percentages blurred momentarily as his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. His eyes scanned the document until they landed on the final, unmistakable line. Paternity, negative. The words hit him like a physical blow. Time seemed to slow as his mind raced to comprehend their meaning. His grip on the paper tightened, his knuckles whitening. Lucas Harper was not his biological son. The kitchen, once filled with warmth, suddenly felt cold and foreign. The hum of the coffee maker, Elena's humming, even Lucas's laughter became distant and hollow. His chest tightened, the weight of the revelation suffocating and relentless. He reread the line over and over, hoping he had misunderstood. "Elena," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The single word carried disbelief and anguish. The scraping of a chair against the floor startled Elena, who turned to him with a smile that quickly faltered when she saw his expression. "Ethan?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern, setting the spatula down. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He simply held out the paper, his hand shaking. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with unspoken accusations and mounting dread. Elena's eyes darted to the document. Her face paled as she read the words. Tears welled up almost instantly, her voice trembling as she broke the silence. "Ethan, I can explain." The room seemed to tilt, the once familiar space now unrecognizable. Ethan's heart pounded, anger and hurt warring within him. The life he thought he knew, the love he had trusted, was crumbling before his eyes. "What is this, Elena?" he demanded, his voice breaking. "What have you done?" Her words stumbled over each other, a frantic attempt to explain. But Ethan could barely hear her. The trust that had anchored their life together was gone, replaced by a chasm of betrayal. The laughter from the living room felt like an intrusion, a cruel reminder of innocence now tainted by the revelation. Ethan's hands trembled as he set the paper down, his gaze locked on Elena, waiting for an explanation that could never make this right. Maya's eyes flicked to the document, and the moment she recognized what it was, her entire demeanor shifted. Her face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks as if every drop of blood had been pulled from her body. The spatula in her hand froze mid-air before clattering onto the counter with a loud clang. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling, I can explain." "Explain." Ethan's voice was louder now, edged with raw anger he couldn't contain. Explain what, Maya? Explain how the boy I've been raising, the boy I've called my son, isn't mine. Explain how long you've been lying to me. How long, Maya? How long have you known? Tears welled in her eyes, and she took a step toward him, her hands trembling. I didn't want you to find out like this, she said softly, her voice cracking. Ethan stepped back, holding up a hand to stop her. Don't. Don't come any closer. His jaw clenched as he fought to keep his emotions in check, but the words poured out in a torrent. You've let me believe he was mine for years, Maya. Years. Do you have any idea what you've done? Her tears fell freely now, streaking her cheeks as she clasped her hands together. It was a mistake, Ethan, she pleaded. I swear, it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, and I didn't know how to fix it. A mistake, he repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. You call this a mistake? You've destroyed everything, Maya. Everything. How do you expect me to move past this? I didn't mean for this to happen, she cried, her voice breaking. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, Ethan, you have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything. Ethan shot back, his voice shaking with the weight of his emotions. I trusted you, Maya. I built a life with you, with Lucas. And now you're telling me it was all a lie. It wasn't a lie, she sobbed. I love you, Ethan. I love Lucas. That's real. Ethan let out a bitter laugh, his anger bubbling to the surface. Real? You want to talk about what's real? This, he thrust the document toward her, his hand trembling, this is real. The fact that he's not my son is real. And the fact that you betrayed me, that's as real as it gets. The silence that followed was suffocating. Maya stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Ethan stared at her, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths, his heart splintering under the weight of the truth. I can't do this right now, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned away from her, the walls of their home closing in on him, suffocating him with memories of a life he thought he understood. Ethan, please. Maya called after him, her voice breaking. Don't walk away. Don't give up on us. But Ethan was already moving. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the door, the sound of it slamming shut echoing through the hollow emptiness of their home. The life he thought he knew was gone, replaced by a devastating void. Ethan's voice cracked, his anger barely masking the deep hurt beneath it. You didn't mean to hurt me, Maya. This isn't just about me, it's about Lucas. Did you ever stop to think about him? About how this would affect him if the truth came out? Maya clasped her hands together tightly, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she tried to steady herself. I thought about it every single day, she said, her voice trembling. And I was terrified of losing you, of losing the family we'd built. Ethan's chest heaved as he struggled to keep his emotions under control. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the guilt carved into her expression, the tears streaming down her face. But it wasn't enough to erase the betrayal. You should have been terrified of what keeping this secret would do to us, to him, Ethan said, his voice sharp and unrelenting. This wasn't just a mistake, Maya. It was a choice. And now we all have to live with the consequences. Maya sank to the floor, her sobs shaking her body as she covered her face with trembling hands. I'm sorry, Ethan, she whispered through her tears. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. Just, please, don't walk away from us. Don't walk away from Lucas. Ethan stared down at her, his heart tearing itself apart. He was caught between the love he'd once felt for the woman crumpled before him and the unbearable weight of her betrayal. I don't even know who you are anymore, Maya, he said, his voice raw. And I don't know if I can stay in a marriage built on lies. Right now, I need space. I need time to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do with the pieces you've left me. Maya looked up at him, her tear-streaked face etched with despair. Please, Ethan, she pleaded, her voice breaking. Don't give up on us. Don't give up on him. Ethan turned away, unable to meet her eyes any longer. I've already lost so much, Maya. Don't ask me to lose myself, too. He walked out of the kitchen, leaving Maya on the floor, the sound of her sobs echoing through the house that now felt irreparably broken. Ethan stumbled out of the house, the door slamming shut behind him with a force that reverberated through the quiet morning air. He hadn't even grabbed a jacket, the cold biting at his skin as he stood on the front steps, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. His head spun, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of disbelief and anger. The weight of the truth pressed heavily on his chest, suffocating him with each passing second. Taking a shaky step forward, Ethan moved instinctively, though he had no idea where he was going. The streets were alive with the usual morning bustle, an indifferent normalcy that seemed to mock the turmoil inside him. A jogger passed by, earbuds in, oblivious to the man whose world had just crumbled. A mother pushed a stroller, chatting animatedly on her phone, her laughter grating against the rawness of Ethan's emotions. He darted his gaze around, taking in the scenes of life continuing as if nothing had changed. But for him, everything had changed. The ground beneath his feet felt unsteady, as though he were teetering on the edge of a cliff. His heart ached with a gnawing emptiness that refused to let him breathe fully. Ethan walked aimlessly, his hands buried deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched against the chill. The sounds of the world, cars passing, distant chatter, a barking dog, faded into a dull hum. All he could hear was the echo of Maya's words, her tearful confessions replaying in his mind like a broken record. The bustling streets seemed worlds away from the storm raging inside him. Bright storefronts displayed cheerful holiday decorations, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted from a nearby bakery. Two children laughed as they chased each other down the sidewalk, their innocence a painful reminder of what Ethan had just lost. He paused at the edge of a crosswalk, watching cars stop and start in an orderly rhythm. The simplicity of it, the predictability, felt foreign, almost cruel. How could life around him move on so effortlessly when his own had come to a screeching halt? Clenching his fists, Ethan dug his nails into his palms as he fought to keep the tears at bay. He couldn't cry, not here, not now. Instead, he walked on, his feet carrying him further from the home that no longer felt like his own. Ethan's new apartment was a stark contrast to the home he had left behind. It was small, barely furnished, and devoid of any personal touch. The walls were an uninviting shade of off-white, and the single window in the living room offered a view of the alley below. A threadbare couch sat in the corner next to a coffee table that had seen better days. The only other furniture was a bed pushed against the wall and a cheap dining table with mismatched chairs. It wasn't much, but it was all Ethan could bring himself to accept. The silence in the apartment was deafening. The absence of Lucas's laughter, the hum of Maya's presence, and the small noises that had once filled his life left a void he couldn't ignore. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the empty walls. Memories of his family haunted him, the Saturday mornings spent making pancakes, the bedtime stories he'd read to Lucas. They were echoes of a life that now felt as distant as a dream. Ethan sat in his barren apartment, the weight of loneliness pressing down on him like a physical burden. Each night, he lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling as the quiet amplified every thought, every memory he wished he could escape. He had left the house to distance himself from the betrayal, but here, in this empty apartment, it clung to him, suffocating and relentless. Picking up his phone, Ethan scrolled through old photos of Lucas. One picture showed Lucas at the park, grinning widely as he sat on Ethan's shoulders. Another captured Lucas proudly holding up a drawing for Father's Day, "Best Dad," scrawled in crayon at the top. The memories sliced through him like daggers, painful reminders of a bond he had thought was unbreakable. Ethan set the phone down, unable to look any longer. The truth, that Lucas wasn't his son by blood, pressed on him like a weight he couldn't shrug off. But it wasn't just the DNA test that tore at him, it was the lies, the years of devotion built on a foundation that Maya had shattered with her betrayal. Running a hand through his hair, Ethan tried to push the pain aside, but it swelled in his chest, threatening to engulf him. He thought of Lucas's small hand gripping his own on the walk to school, the way Lucas had sprinted to him after scoring a goal at soccer practice, his voice ringing with pride as he called out, "Dad." How could any of that have been a lie? The apartment grew colder with each passing day. Ethan avoided unpacking most of his belongings, as though leaving the boxes untouched might mean this separation wasn't permanent. He ate meals alone at the small table, the sound of his fork scraping the plate the only noise in the room. He tried drowning himself in work, taking on long hours to avoid the thoughts that clawed at him. But even there, the memories followed. A coworker mentioning their son's first baseball game sent a pang of longing and guilt through him. Seeing a child on the street brought back the sound of Lucas's laugh, his bright eyes filled with trust. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan sat by the window, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He stared at the street below, watching as people moved about their lives. A father walked hand in hand with his daughter, their quiet conversation punctuated by her laughter. Ethan's chest ached at the sight, imagining Lucas in her place, his small hand fitting perfectly into his own. No matter how hard Ethan tried, he couldn't escape the memories. The silence of the apartment became a prison, forcing him to confront the truth: his family was broken. The betrayal had cut too deep. Maya's tearful pleas replayed in his mind, the way she had begged him to forgive her, to stay. But forgiveness felt impossible. How could he forgive the woman who had taken away the one thing he loved most? How could he trust her again after the lies? Yet it wasn't Maya's face that haunted him most. It was Lucas's. The boy who had looked up to him with unfiltered love and trust. The boy who still called him Dad, even when the truth made it clear that he wasn't. Ethan buried his face in his hands as the weight of his emotions came crashing down. He didn't know how to move forward. The pain was too fresh, the memories too vivid. All he could do was sit in the quiet and hope that one day the emptiness wouldn't feel so heavy. The knock at the door startled Ethan, pulling him from his thoughts. Glancing at the clock, he frowned. It was late, and he wasn't expecting anyone. Reluctantly, he rose from the couch, the floor creaking under his weight, and opened the door. "Lily," he said, his tone a mixture of surprise and irritation. Maya's best friend stood there, her expression soft but resolute. "Ethan," she replied gently, "can I come in?" He hesitated, his first instinct to shut the door and retreat into the solitude that had become his norm. But something in Lily's eyes stopped him. With a sigh, he stepped aside and motioned for her to enter. The apartment was sparse, its lack of warmth a stark contrast to the home they had once shared. Lily's gaze swept over the room, lingering on the unopened boxes stacked in the corner. She didn't comment, but her expression spoke volumes. "You didn't have to come," Ethan said, crossing his arms. "I did," Lily replied firmly, taking a seat on the worn couch. She looked up at him with unwavering resolve. "I couldn't just sit by and watch you fall apart, not when there's so much at stake." Ethan scoffed, leaning against the wall. "What's at stake, Lily?" "Everything's already gone. My marriage. My trust. My family." Lily shook her head, her voice calm but insistent. "Not everything, Ethan. Lucas is still here. He's still your son." Ethan's chest tightened at the mention of Lucas. He looked away, his jaw clenching. "Is he?" he asked bitterly. "He's not mine, Lily. Not by blood. And every time I think about it, it feels like everything I had was a lie." Lily stood and moved closer, her voice steady. "Lucas doesn't care about blood, Ethan. He cares about you. You're the one who's been there for him, every single day. The one who's taught him, loved him, protected him. You are his father. Don't let your anger take that away from him. Ethan's shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. The truth in them hit harder than he expected. But could he really set aside the pain and betrayal for Lucas's sake? Lily placed a hand gently on his arm. Don't walk away from him, Ethan. He needs you now more than ever. Ethan didn't respond right away. He stared out the window, the quiet of the room pressing in around him. Finally, he said, I don't know if I can do this, Lily. You can, she said softly but firmly. Because no one else can be the father he knows and loves. That's you, Ethan. No one else. Ethan shook his head, his voice raw. You think it's that simple? You think I can just forget everything Maya did? She lied to me, Lily. She let me believe Lucas was mine for years. How do I move past that? Lily placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him for a moment. I'm not asking you to forgive Maya. That's your choice, and it'll take time. But don't let her mistakes ruin what you have with Lucas. He's innocent in all of this, Ethan. He needs you now more than ever. Ethan's eyes glistened as he struggled to keep his emotions in check. I don't even know where to start, Lily. Every time I look at him, I see the truth, and it hurts. Lily's voice softened, filled with compassion. Then start with love. Start with the bond you already have with him. Lucas doesn't see the truth the way you do. He sees his dad, the man who's always been there for him. Don't let your pain take that away from him, or from yourself. Ethan sank into the couch, burying his face in his hands. I don't know if I can do it, he whispered. You can, Lily said, sitting beside him. Because you love him. And love is stronger than anger, stronger than betrayal. It's the one thing that can help you both heal. Ethan sat in silence, Lily's words echoing in his mind. He thought of Lucas's laugh, the way his eyes lit up when Ethan called him buddy, the way he had always run to him, no matter what. Finally, Ethan looked up at Lily, his voice quiet but resolute. I don't know if I can fix everything, but I'll try. For Lucas. Lily smiled, her expression a mix of relief and encouragement. That's all he needs, Ethan, for you to try. The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel as heavy. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a small flicker of hope, a path forward, however uncertain, for him and Lucas. Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the stillness of the room. He glanced at it, expecting another work email or a notification he could ignore, but the name on the screen froze him in place. Michael Harris. His hand hovered over the phone before he swiped to open the message. Michael, Ethan, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but there's something you need to know. This has been weighing on me for a long time, and I can't stay silent anymore. It's about Lucas. Ethan's chest tightened as he read the next lines. Michael, I'm involved in Lucas's life more than you realize. He deserves the truth, and so do you. I know this will hurt, but I've always felt like I had to step back for his sake. Maybe it's time we both face the reality of what this means for him, and for us. Ethan read the message twice, his breath quickening. He stared at the words, his mind racing with questions. What did Michael mean by involved? How dare he imply he had a role in Lucas's life, a life Ethan had poured everything into? Ethan's blood boiled as he reread the message, his hands gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. His jaw clenched, and a deep, simmering anger began to rise within him. He had tolerated enough, Maya's betrayal, the truth about Lucas's paternity, but this? This was too much. He typed furiously, the screen barely keeping up with his fingers. Ethan, what the hell are you talking about, Michael? You don't get to rewrite history and claim some role in Lucas's life. He's my son. I've been there for him every single day. You've done nothing but destroy everything we had. He hit send, his heart pounding as he paced the room. His mind raced with memories of Lucas, his first steps, the way he called him "Dad" with such innocence, the countless bedtime stories and scraped knees he had tended to. Michael's words echoed in his mind like a cruel taunt. "I've been more involved in Lucas's life than you realize." Involved? What does that even mean? Ethan muttered bitterly. "A few moments of weakness with Maya, and now you think you're entitled to my son?" He stared at his phone, waiting for a reply, his rage only growing. He couldn't let Michael undermine the bond he had with Lucas. He couldn't let this man stake a claim on the child he had raised and loved. Grabbing his coat, Ethan stepped outside, needing air to cool the fire inside him. But as he paced the sidewalk, his anger refused to subside. His role as Lucas's father was all he had left, the one connection that still felt real, and now Michael was threatening that too. "He's my son," Ethan thought fiercely. "You don't get to take that from me." The cold air bit at his skin, but it couldn't chill the storm raging within him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ethan knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let anyone, least of all Michael, rewrite the truth of his relationship with Lucas. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, the silence of the apartment heavy around him. The day's events had drained him, leaving him a shell of the man he used to be. He was lost in thought when a soft knock on the door broke his reverie. He knew who it was before he even answered. Opening the door, he found Lucas standing there, his small frame silhouetted in the dim hallway light. His son's eyes, usually so bright with mischief and curiosity, were now clouded with uncertainty and fear. "Dad?" Noah's voice trembled, and Ethan's heart clenched at the sound. "Come in, buddy," Ethan said softly, stepping aside to let him in. Noah hesitated for a moment, then walked into the room, his movements tentative as though afraid of being scolded. He climbed onto the bed, sitting cross-legged while nervously fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor, avoiding Ethan's. "Is it true?" Noah finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew this moment was coming but had hoped to shield Noah from the harsh truths for a little longer. "Is what true, son?" Ethan asked gently, though he dreaded the answer. "I heard you and Mom," Noah said, his voice breaking. "You said I'm not really your son." Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over as he choked on his words. "Does that mean you're not my dad anymore?" Ethan froze, the question cutting through him like a knife. He moved closer, sinking to his knees so he was at eye level with Noah. Resting his hands on the boy's small shoulders, he said firmly, his voice thick with emotion, "Noah, listen to me. I am your dad. I've always been your dad, and I always will be. Nothing changes that." Noah looked up at him, tears falling freely now. "But you said I'm not yours." Ethan's heart shattered at the pain in his son's voice. He cupped Noah's face gently, forcing him to meet his eyes. "You are mine, Noah," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "You've been mine since the day you were born. I was there for your first steps, your first words, every scraped knee and bedtime story. I don't care about what a piece of paper says, you're my son. Do you hear me? You're my son." Noah sniffled, his small hands gripping Ethan's shirt as if afraid to let go. "But Mom said." "Michael." Ethan closed his eyes, fighting the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. This wasn't the time to let his feelings about Maya or Michael interfere. This moment was about Noah. "It doesn't matter what anyone else says," Ethan said softly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "I'm the one who's always been here for you. I'm the one who loves you more than anything in the world, and I always will. Nothing can ever take that away." Noah's tears slowed, his breathing evening out as he leaned into Ethan's chest. "You promise?" Ethan wrapped his arms around Noah, holding him close as if to shield him from the chaos outside their little bubble. "I promise," he whispered. "No matter what happens, you'll always have me." For a long time, they sat there in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. Ethan stroked Noah's hair, his own tears falling silently as he realized just how much he needed this moment too. "You're my hero, Dad," Noah said softly, his voice muffled against Ethan's chest. Ethan smiled weakly, his heart aching but full at the same time. "You're mine too, buddy. Always." As Noah drifted off to sleep in his arms, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter how broken his world seemed, no matter how much pain he carried, he knew he had to fight. For Noah. For their bond. For the future they still had together. The battle with Maya and Michael was far from over, and Ethan's internal struggle would continue to rage. But in that moment, holding his son close, he felt a flicker of hope. That bond, unshakable and pure, was something no one could ever take from him. The alumni reunion was held in the banquet hall of a local hotel, its grand chandeliers casting a warm glow over the bustling crowd. Laughter and the clinking of glasses echoed through the room as groups of old friends huddled together, swapping stories of their past and catching up on their present. The air was thick with nostalgia, the kind that brought both comfort and discomfort in equal measure. Ethan entered reluctantly, his steps hesitant as he scanned the room. He had avoided social gatherings like this since his life had been torn apart, but Sam, an old friend, had insisted he attend. He needed the distraction, or so Sam had claimed. Yet, as Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his shirt and offered polite nods to familiar faces, he couldn't shake the gnawing unease in his chest. And then he saw them. Maya stood by the bar, nervously cradling a glass of wine. Her eyes darted around the room until they locked onto his. She froze, the color draining from her face. Standing beside her, in stark contrast, was Michael. He exuded a calm confidence that set Ethan's teeth on edge. The sight of the two of them together sent a wave of anger surging through him. Ethan clenched his fists, his heart pounding as the suffocating reality of the situation settled over him. The warm, nostalgic ambience of the reunion now felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of everything he had lost. As if drawn by an invisible force, Michael began making his way toward Ethan. Maya hesitated, her gaze flicking between the two men, but she didn't follow. Instead, she remained rooted in place, her expression one of helplessness. Michael approached with a measured stride, his hands in his pockets, his demeanor calm and composed. "Ethan," he began, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of authority. "We need to talk." Ethan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "There's nothing to talk about," he replied coldly, his voice barely concealing the fury bubbling beneath the surface. "For Lucas's sake," Michael continued, undeterred. "This isn't about us. It's about him. He deserves to know the truth, to have clarity about his life." "The truth?" Ethan's voice rose, sharp and filled with venom. "The truth is that you've done enough damage, Michael. You don't get to waltz in here and pretend you care about Lucas after everything you've done." Michael's calm facade remained, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not here to fight with you, Ethan. I'm here because this isn't about us or our egos. It's about doing what's right for Lucas." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What's right for Lucas? You mean after you helped tear his family apart? After you lied and kept secrets that shattered everything? Don't you dare lecture me about what's right for him." The conversation, once subdued, had now drawn the attention of nearby guests. A hush began to fall over the crowd as curious eyes turned toward the escalating tension. Maya, still standing by the bar, looked as though she wanted to intervene, but she remained silent, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. Michael sighed, his calm demeanor beginning to crack. "Ethan, I know you're angry." "Angry?" Ethan interrupted, his voice booming now. "Angry doesn't even begin to cover it. You had no right, to interfere in my family, in my life. And now you think you can just claim Lucas like he's some prize you're entitled to." Michael's jaw tightened, and for the first time, his tone sharpened. I'm not claiming anything, Ethan. I'm trying to step up for him, to be there in a way I wasn't before. You're the one letting your anger cloud what's best for him. Ethan took a step closer, his voice low but laced with fury. You don't get to decide what's best for him. You don't know him like I do. You weren't there when he took his first steps, when he was sick and needed comfort, or when he looked at me and called me, Dad. I was there, Michael. Me, not you. The tension between the two men was palpable, the air thick with unresolved pain and anger. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, onlookers unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. Maya finally took a tentative step forward, her voice trembling as she spoke. Please, stop, both of you. This isn't helping. Ethan turned to her, his voice breaking. Don't you dare try to play peacemaker now, Maya. You're the reason we're standing here, tearing each other apart in front of everyone. Maya flinched as though struck, her eyes welling with tears. I never wanted this, Ethan. I never wanted any of this. Ethan's laugh was bitter, his pain spilling out in his words. Well, congratulations, Maya. You got it anyway. Unable to take it anymore, Ethan turned on his heel and stormed toward the exit. The crowd parted for him, their hushed whispers trailing after him as he pushed open the doors and stepped into the cool night air. The cold hit him like a slap, but it wasn't enough to quell the fire raging inside him. He paced the empty parking lot, his breaths coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The confrontation replayed in his mind, each word from Michael and Maya cutting deeper into the wounds that hadn't even begun to heal. He stopped and leaned against his car, his hands gripping the edge of the roof as he stared out into the darkness. The night was silent, the distant hum of traffic the only sound. For a brief moment, Ethan closed his eyes, letting the stillness wash over him. But the pain remained, the betrayal, the anger, the sense of loss. It all clung to him, suffocating and inescapable. He knew he couldn't outrun it. Couldn't escape it, no matter how far he went. And yet, in the quiet of the night, he realized one thing, for Lucas's sake, he had to find a way to face it. The knock at the door was hesitant, almost timid, but in the silence of Ethan's apartment, it sounded deafening. He glanced up from the cup of coffee he'd been nursing for hours, his brows furrowing. He didn't need to check who it was. He already knew. Slowly, reluctantly, he stood and walked toward the door. When he opened it, Maya stood there, her shoulders hunched as if bracing herself for rejection. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale. She clutched the edge of her coat tightly, her knuckles white as though holding on for courage. Ethan, she said, her voice trembling. Please. I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I need to talk to you. Just give me a minute. Ethan's jaw tightened, his emotions swirling in a storm of anger, pain, and something he couldn't quite name. For a moment, he considered slamming the door in her face. But then he thought of Lucas, his bright eyes, his trusting smile. Come in, Ethan said finally, his voice stiff and cold. Ethan stepped aside, his jaw tight and voice curt. Fine, he said. You've got a minute. Maya entered cautiously, her movements tentative as though she feared the space itself might reject her. She stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, wringing her hands, her gaze flitting around the sparse apartment. The weight of what she'd done seemed to press down on her, making her seem smaller. Ethan, she began, her voice breaking, I don't even know where to start. I've been replaying everything over and over in my head, trying to figure out how I let things get this bad, how I hurt you and Lucas so deeply. Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. His eyes were cold, his voice sharp. Did you find an answer? Or are you here just to throw more excuses at me? She flinched, the words cutting through her defenses. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I'm not here to make excuses. There's no excuse for what I did. I was selfish, weak, and I made mistakes I can never take back. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line, his anger barely contained. Mistakes. You think what you did was just a mistake. Do you even understand what you've done, Maya? You didn't just betray me, you broke us. You broke our family. Tears streamed down Maya's face as she nodded. I know, Ethan, I know. And I hate myself for it every single day. I don't expect you to forgive me, not now, maybe not ever, but I can't just walk away from this without trying to fix it. Without trying to fix us. Ethan let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Fix us. Maya, do you even realize how much you've destroyed? Do you really think an apology is enough to fix this? Maya took a shaky step forward, her hands trembling as she reached out, then hesitated, letting them fall back to her sides. I don't think an apology will fix anything, she admitted. But I need you to know that I'll fight for this, for you, for Lucas. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I can be better. That I can be the person you and Lucas deserve. Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands for a moment before looking at him again, her eyes raw and pleading. Ethan, he needs you. He loves you so much. You're his dad in every way that matters. Please, don't let my mistakes take that away from him. Ethan's chest tightened at the mention of Lucas. Images of his son, his laughter, his trust, the way he called him, Dad, rose unbidden in his mind. His resolve wavered, and he looked away, unable to meet Maya's gaze. You think I don't know that, he said quietly, his voice rough. You think I don't lie awake every night wondering how the hell I'm supposed to be his dad after all of this? After finding out he's not mine? Maya stepped closer, her voice soft but urgent. He is yours, Ethan. In every way that matters. He doesn't care about biology. He cares about you. And I know I've ruined so much, but I'm begging you, for him, don't let this destroy what you have with him. Ethan turned to face her, his eyes filled with pain. And what about us, Maya? What do you expect me to do with all of this? With everything you've done? I don't expect anything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need you to know that I'll do anything to make this right. Even if it takes the rest of my life. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his emotions warring within him, anger, betrayal, love, guilt, all colliding and leaving him exhausted and unsure. But through it all, one truth remained, Lucas. Finally, he spoke, his voice hesitant but steady. I don't know if I can forgive you, Maya. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. But for Lucas's sake, I'll try. Maya let out a shaky breath, her tears falling freely now. Thank you, Ethan, she said, her voice breaking. Don't thank me, he said, turning away. This isn't for you, it's for him. Maya nodded and quietly left. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Ethan alone in the silence. For the first time in weeks, though, the silence didn't feel quite as heavy. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a start. Ethan sat on the park bench, watching Lucas dart between the swings and the monkey bars, his laughter ringing out across the playground. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of peace. Lucas's smile had been rare lately, clouded by confusion and sadness. But today, it was bright and genuine. Look, Dad. Lucas called, climbing to the top of the play structure. His face lit up with pride as he balanced on the narrow beam. I see you, buddy. Ethan called back, a small smile tugging at his lips. He gave an exaggerated thumbs up, and Lucas beamed. Since his conversation with Maya, Ethan had thrown himself into creating stability for Lucas. He rearranged his work schedule to pick him up from school, signed him up for soccer lessons, and started a weekend tradition of pancake breakfasts. These small rituals became anchors, keeping Lucas's world steady in the wake of the upheaval. Ethan also made time to talk to Lucas, ensuring he felt safe to express his fears. It's okay to feel sad or confused, Ethan would tell him, his voice steady but warm. Ethan told Lucas one evening, while they worked on a school project together, "No matter what, I'm always here." Lucas nodded, his small hand clutching Ethan's tightly. "You won't leave, right?" "Never," Ethan said firmly. "I'll always be your dad. That's a promise." After their time at the park, Maya arrived at Ethan's apartment to pick Lucas up. She waited by the door, hesitant but calm, as Ethan ushered Lucas out with his backpack. "Thanks for letting him stay the extra night," Maya said softly. Ethan nodded, his tone even. "It's for him. Lucas needs to feel loved and secure, that's all I care about." Maya sighed, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I know, and I appreciate that we're doing this together for him." Ethan crossed his arms, his voice firm but without malice. "Let's be clear. This isn't about us. I'm doing this because Lucas deserves a family that works, even if it's not perfect. But it doesn't mean I'm ready to forgive. Don't read more into it." She nodded, her expression a mixture of guilt and understanding. "I won't. I'll keep trying to be better for both of you." Ethan didn't respond immediately, his focus shifting to Lucas climbing into Maya's car. "Let's keep the focus on him," he said finally. "That's what matters." As Maya drove off, Ethan turned back toward his apartment. He knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain, but his priority was clear: Lucas's happiness. That, at least, was something he could fight for. The apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed down heavily, amplifying every creak of the walls and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Ethan sat by the window, the soft glow of the city lights filtering in, casting long shadows across the room. He cradled a mug of coffee in his hands, its warmth grounding him as he stared out at the street below. People moved about their lives, walking dogs, chatting in groups, laughing without a care in the world. It was a scene of normalcy, the kind Ethan had once taken for granted. Now, it felt distant, almost unreachable. Taking a slow sip of coffee, he let the bitter taste linger on his tongue. His thoughts swirled, much like the steam rising from his cup. The pain was still there, raw and jagged, a constant reminder of what had been taken from him. The betrayal, the lies, the sense of security he'd built his life around, it all felt like a distant memory, something he could barely touch anymore. Yet, as he sat there, he realized the sharp edge of his anger had dulled, ever so slightly. His mind drifted to Lucas, the light in all this darkness. The boys' laughter at the park. The way he had held Ethan's hand so tightly. His whispered plea, "You won't leave, right?" That moment stayed with Ethan, a reminder of what truly mattered. Ethan leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. His mind replayed memories of happier times, Sunday mornings spent flipping pancakes, Lucas perched on the counter giggling as he tried to sneak chocolate chips into the batter. He thought of Maya's laughter back then, the way it had filled their home with warmth. The memories brought an ache to his chest, but they no longer felt unbearable. He opened his eyes, staring down at the mug in his hands. Forgiveness. The word lingered in his mind, like a distant echo. Could he ever truly forgive Maya? Could he move past what she had done? Ethan didn't know the answer. He wasn't sure if forgiveness was even possible, let alone reconciliation. But for the first time, he realized forgiveness wasn't about her. It was about him. Holding on to the anger and bitterness had consumed him, leaving him exhausted and hollow. Letting go, even just a little, felt like the only way forward. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly, as he allowed himself to acknowledge the small glimmers of hope piercing through the darkness. His bond with Lucas was unshakable, something even the hardest truths couldn't destroy. And Maya, though he didn't trust her and didn't know if he ever could again, had shown a willingness to fight for Lucas and try to repair the damage she had done. Healing would take time, that much was clear. Ethan wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. The wounds were too fresh, the scars still forming. But he could see the path ahead, even if it was shrouded in uncertainty. Setting the mug down, Ethan stood and stretched. He moved toward the small bookshelf by the wall and pulled out a framed photo of Lucas. It was one of his favorites, from a trip to the lake last summer. Lucas was grinning ear to ear, his face smeared with marshmallow from the s'mores they'd made. Ethan traced a finger along the edge of the frame, a small smile tugging at his lips. Lucas deserves a family that doesn't fall apart, he murmured to himself. The words weren't just a resolution. They were a promise to fight for the moments that mattered, to rebuild something stable for his son, even if it didn't look like the life he had once imagined. Ethan returned to his seat by the window, the photo now resting on the table beside him. He stared out into the night, the quiet hum of the city filling the room. The pain was still there, but so was the hope. For the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Ethan stood at the edge of the park, watching Lucas run toward the swings, his laughter carried on the cool evening breeze. Maya stood a few feet away, her hands in her coat pockets, watching Lucas with a mix of hope and quiet regret. The air between her and Ethan was neither warm nor cold, filled instead with an unspoken understanding that neither was ready to articulate. Their conversations had become pragmatic, focused on schedules, school events, and ensuring Lucas felt loved and supported. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step, however small, towards something less fractured. Sitting in his apartment that night, Ethan found himself staring at the photo of Lucas on his desk. It was the same one he'd held just days earlier, from their summer trip to the lake. Lucas's smile reminded him why he had made the decisions he had. The road ahead is long, Ethan thought, leaning back in his chair. But maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to move forward. He let his thoughts drift, revisiting the moments that had defined the last few months, Maya's betrayal, Michael's unwelcome presence, the overwhelming pain of watching his carefully built life crumble. It had all been too much. And yet, through it all, there was Lucas, a constant reminder of the love that had once existed and could still exist, even if in a different form. Ethan reflected on the lessons this journey had taught him. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired, but it wasn't impossible either. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing the past, it meant choosing not to let it dictate the future. He had also learned that love could take on many forms. His love for Lucas was unconditional, unshakable, even in the face of revelations that had tested every fiber of his being. And while his love for Maya was something far more complicated now, he couldn't deny that it still existed, albeit buried under layers of hurt and mistrust. Most of all, he realized that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey, taken one step at a time. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't need to. What mattered was that he was willing to try. The future remained uncertain. Co-parenting with Maya was a delicate balance, fraught with reminders of what they had lost and glimpses of what they still shared. Some days, the wounds felt fresh, as though they had just been inflicted. Other days, the ache was softer, a dull reminder of something that might one day fade. Ethan didn't know if reconciliation was possible. He didn't know if he could ever trust Maya again. But he knew they both wanted what was best for Lucas, and that shared goal was enough to keep them moving forward, however slowly. As Ethan watched Lucas asleep in his bed that night, he felt a small sense of peace. The boy's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, his face serene. It was in moments like these that Ethan felt his purpose most clearly. This is what matters, he thought. Not the past. Not the pain. This. He knew the road would be long and difficult. There would be setbacks, days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But there would also be moments of joy, of connection, of hope. Ethan returned to his chair by the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. He thought of Lucas, of Maya, of the family they were trying to rebuild in a new, imperfect way. The road ahead is long, he murmured, his voice soft in the quiet room. But maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to move forward. And as he gazed out at the night sky, for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that it was possible.